guys, I'm back this week and here to review a new module I just picked up called the Cwejman BLD, which stands for Bass Lead and Drum Generator. It's a pretty interesting module, and it's not really a module that was at the top of my list, but I have so many Cwejman modules that I really wanted to add it to my system. If nothing else, because it would give me a slightly different sound, a different voice. And what I've found so far is that it's really one of the most interesting modules that's put out by the company. It's truly a synth on a module. It's really a complete synthesizer in many ways. It's got a single oscillator. It's got a low-pass filter, and it's got two envelopes and a noise generator. And then finally, it's got a VCA on it as well. So pretty much a complete synth, with the exception of maybe some additional modulation, such as an LFO. You could certainly add that type of capability by combining it with other modules, but this is really truly a complete synth in many ways. Now, because it is so complete, it lacks a little bit of flexibility in the sense that it doesn't have as many patch points as a typical standalone module might have. So with the completeness comes, I guess, a downside in that maybe it's not as flexible from a patching standpoint. But let me walk you through this really interesting module and show you some of its capabilities. I'll walk you through all the different knobs and what the jacks are and the input and output jacks. Starting with the upper left-hand corner, we have the oscillator controls, the fine pitch oscillator control and a coarse pitch oscillator control. You can also control the FM1 level via this knob. There's two frequency modulation inputs. There's an FM1, and the FM1 is basically a leveled bipolar frequency modulation input. And then there's FM2, and FM2 tracks the typical 1 volt per octave tracking, so it'll track your keyboard perfectly. So there's two different options there for the frequency modulation inputs. I'm currently plugged into the FM2. This is plugged into an external sequencer I have that was sort of generating that initial drum sequence at the introduction of this video. So we've got the oscillator inputs, and then you can set what type of oscillator waveform you want to use. And there's three different waveforms. So there's a triangle waveform, there's a square, and then there's a sawtooth waveform. Well, what's really interesting is that on this module, you can actually set a mix of oscillator waveforms. So it's not a hard switch where it's either a triangle wave or square or sawtooth. You actually set the mix. So I can set a mix somewhere between a triangle and a square, between a square and a saw as I turn this knob. So it's actually, unless I'm pointed right at that waveform, it's giving me a mix of two different waveforms, which is kind of cool. And then the square waveform also has different pulse widths that you can set here with this knob. There's also a pulse width modulation input on the bottom. There's also a sync input, so I can sync that oscillator to some other control voltage. I could sync it to another oscillator, for example, in a different module. if I really wanted to. There's a trigger input, which I've currently plugged into. So there's a trigger input there, but what's also pretty cool is that there is a manual trigger right here. If I push this, you see it lights up. And so that's pretty handy because, you're typically using this module to generate things like drum sounds. It could be bass drums or snare type sounds, hi-hat type sounds. And so it's really convenient to be able to just hit that trigger right there. You don't even need anything plugged into the module and kind of, test out and work and create the sound that you want to create without having to patch anything into it. So that's kind of different. By the way, this module isn't just a drum module. I mean, it's labeled as bass, lead, and drum. So the bass sounds that come out of this are pretty phenomenal. And then you can create any sort of lead sound as well. I mean, it only has a single oscillator. So there is somewhat of a limitation there, but you can combine that oscillator with, with the noise generator. As you'll see, you can do all kinds of things with the envelopes, and you could do things with the pulse width modulation and so on. So it can sound really big if you need it to. Okay, so the filter has a number of controls. So you've got a frequency cutoff right here at the top for the filter, and then there's the Q peak or the resonance setting, and of course you can really saturate that resonance and have it go into self oscillation very easily. There is a cutoff level control here as well, and then below that there is another knob that's labeled cutoff. On one side it says AHR, and the other side it says AR. In the middle it says 0. So this is a control where you're really setting the level of the envelope for the filter. So you can either say that the filter is going to be you can use the there's two envelopes on this module, the AR envelope and the AHR envelope. So one's an attack release, very simple. The other one's a little more complex, but not much more, attack, hold, and release. And you can determine which envelope is going to affect the filter just by changing this control from one side to the other. And then on the bottom, it's the same thing, but for the VCA, for the amplifier. So you determine which envelope impacts the amplifier, the AR envelope on the right, or way over to the left, the AHR envelope. So pretty nice. If you look at this module on the surface, it doesn't seem all that deep, but as you really start looking at it, you recognize that there's a lot more complexity that's built into this particular module. One of the limitations I mentioned in terms of the flexibility is that you don't have much patch control over the filter. So you can't. There's no input a jack for the cutoff or the resonance. So that is one limitation of this particular module, that you just don't have much control over the filter in the module. Okay, so the rest of the knobs here real quick. I said two envelopes. Here's one of them, the attack and release. Very simple, straightforward envelope. Really kind of a perfect envelope for drum sounds. That's all you need is that attack release. And then the attack hold release, the second envelope here. And both envelopes are fully controllable. So with inputs, there's the attack release inputs and then the attack hold release inputs as well for control voltage inputs. And then there's outputs for each as well, the attack release and attack hold release outputs. So you could use this module just for the two envelopes. You could use them independently within your system, and I think a lot of people say that this module is worth it just for the envelopes alone. I guess I don't disagree with that. The envelopes are pretty amazing and they're really fast. Here, let me dial this up. I'm going to plug into the amp section. You can see how fast that is. Really wickedly fast envelopes. Kind of a bass sound there. I mean, the envelopes are really awesome to work with. They're so dynamic. They're so fast that they're just a pleasure to work with on this particular module. This last knob here is the noise level. So there's a noise generator, and you can when it's pointed at the top, which is the 0 marking, there's no noise generator or no noise added to the signal. There's and to kind of complete the inputs, this is the velocity input in the lower right hand corner, and that's useful because if you have, let's say, a velocity control keyboard, you can use that input to add more of a sort of dynamic range to the playing of your drums, or the playing of your bass sound, or even your leads that you generate from this module. In terms of the outputs, I've been plugged into mostly the amp output. So there's two outputs on the module. There's a low pass filter output and there's an amplifier output. Of course, when you use the amplifier output, then you're gonna, you can use you have another envelope which is modifying the VCA. If you're using the low pass filter, you may choose to use an envelope, or you might keep it at 0, in which case there's no envelope impacting the filter. What I've found is that if you want to make those really deep drum sounds, those deep bass drum sounds, pulling the signal right off of that low pass filter here seems to be the way to go. It's amazing when that filter starts to sort of self-oscillate. You get some just really deep bass drum sounds. So it's something that you can play with. It's nice that there's the option to use both of those outputs, and you could even use both of them simultaneously if you really wanted to, and sort of mix them together or send the signals in different directions. It's an interesting module. There's a lot of capabilities. Oh, one last thing I forgot to mention here is that for the envelope on the low pass filter, if you set an envelope on the low pass filter, you can determine whether that's a positive or negative envelope based on this switch right here. So that's a nice capability. So you can you can create those kind of interesting sounds using the negative envelope on the filter. It's a cool module, guys. Highly recommended, and thanks for watching the video.